I said in part 1 that there were some Western influences the show follows, but also there were plenty of pop culture references. Without the help of an online list, I was able to find quite a few Easter eggs throughout the series, like this one. On the screen, you can see the names of the actors from the original Star Trek, and here you can see a model of the original Enterprise. Yeah, something tells me that a lot of the people that worked on this series were big fans of Star Trek. I also briefly mentioned the Indiana Jones references, but there was also Rambo, Terminator. Kay even talks about how this predicament they are in reminds her of the ending of the first Terminator film. So what does this have to do with anything? I don't know, I just wanted to point it out. But what is important is this. In part 2, I mentioned the role that Ghoulie played in the show, being an irritated, stern boss for our main characters. But there is one thing that makes him different from all other versions of characters that play similar roles. Ghoulie's actually a really nice guy. The amount of problems that these girls cause on many occasions is enough to make anyone go crazy. So Ghoulie being hard on these two is justifiable, but when he isn't under a lot of pressure, he can be very understanding at times, and in the end, he only wants what is best for them. I remember watching one episode when Ghoulie even invited Kay and Yuri over for a dinner party. I won't tell you which episode this was from, since it would actually destroy the punchline to a joke, but I digress. So why am I talking about him? Well, let's talk about the final episode of the series. It starts off with Kay and Yuri getting into their usual arguments. Yuri catches Kay munching on some cake that Yuri was saving for a special occasion. Things escalate out of control, and somehow it leads up to Kay getting stuck in the fridge, which results in her getting a bit of the sniffles. But whatever, business as usual. They head over to the 3WA headquarters to receive their assignment for the day, but instead of finding Chief Ghoulie, they find out from Calico, Ghoulie's assistant, that he was betrayed and captured by Head of Security, Captain Marcus. Apparently Marcus is the leader of an uprising at the 3WA's weapons research facility that is located on top of a dormant volcano. That is where Ghoulie is being held captive. The news gets worse. Apparently Marcus wants not only an enormous amount of money in exchange for Ghoulie's safety, but also wants to take over as the director of the 3WA. And if they don't comply, he will destroy the entire city with an experimental top-secret laser cannon called the Super God Cannon. I'm sorry, do they really have to use the word super? So, I already started to make my predictions on what would happen next in this episode. I assumed that the girls would infiltrate the facility with guns blazing, explosions everywhere in order to apprehend Marcus, but I was wrong. Obviously, the girls do plan on doing something like that. The problem here is that the high-ups of the 3WA have ordered the facility's destruction by reawakening the volcano, effectively eliminating the threat at the expense of the weapons research facility. So, basically, he's no longer a threat. Doesn't matter that he has a cannon, doesn't matter that he has a battalion under his command. Marcus has lost. In 12 hours, they will all be up in smoke, including the chief. Obviously, that doesn't settle well with the two, but this is completely out of Calico's control. The 3WA will not authorize the rescue mission for fear of provoking Marcus any further. That's all this episode is about. These girls aren't trying to rescue a group of people, stop a crime lord, or save a planet. They're just putting themselves in harm's way to help a stern middle-aged man. So they head off to the facility, except there's one problem. The 3WA doesn't know, which means they have absolutely no access to their equipment. This includes their weapons, jetpacks, transportation, you name it. And on top of that, Kay still has a bit of a cold. And that's not a good thing to have during a stealth mission. But their determination is stronger than that, and they at least manage to find some form of transport. A helium balloon. It was here that I realized that it was going to be one of those episodes where the odds are really against our main characters. In a nutshell, this is what happens. The girls get caught, then they escape, they get caught, they escape, they get caught again, they escape again. It sounds repetitive, but it's not. Because, bear in mind, other than the times that they disarm the soldiers, they for the most part don't have any weapons of their own. So a lot of the time they have to get very creative in overcoming any obstacle. It's a lot of fun watching these girls use whatever resources they have to accomplish their ultimate goal. However, there is one scene that I did not like. This may be the only flaw in this whole episode, but it's a big one. So the girls lost their weapons again. And now they are back to square one, and unfortunately Kay's sneezing doesn't make things any better. So they then pretend to argue of who's more beautiful, thus by distracting the soldiers long enough for them to get close enough to be within arm's reach without the soldiers shooting at them. And I will admit, this scene actually was kind of funny because they go from pretending to argue who's more gorgeous to actually arguing about who's better looking. But I've always hated the whole chick flirting her way to something, and although the scene doesn't technically get explicit, a little too much skin is shown. I know some people will probably tell me, yeah, but Dash, they had nothing to fight with. I don't care. The writers could have done something better. Anywho, so they manage to knock out the soldiers, steal their uniforms, and finally they make it into the facility. By using the security computer, they are then able to locate Ghoulie. The bad news, however, is that he's located in the observatory, which is currently sealed off, thus leaving them with two alternatives.
侵入できるのは通風口だけか。
展望室の通風口なんて危険よ。すぐ見つかっちゃう。見て。床下の兵器格納庫にはゴッドキャノンが収めてあるわ。もうすぐ表に出すはずよ。必ず床が開くわ。
開かなかったらどうすんのよ。展望室の通風口でチャンスを待つべきだよ。
開くわよ絶対。
展望室のが確実。
This is the dynamic that I like between these two. One suggests an approach that offers less risk but is more elaborate. The other, much simpler but is more dangerous. Of course, they cannot reach an agreement, so they decide to go their separate ways, to do their own thing. Or so, that's what would have happened if they were in this situation earlier on in the series. But at this point, their friendship and trust in each other has grown too much for their pride to ultimately govern their actions. So they make a compromise, which in a way still sticks to their original intentions, but with a cooperative element added. As originally intended, Kay proceeds to the airshaft whilst Yuri heads over to the cannon. Something I want to point out about the tone of this episode is that it never goes too far. The drama doesn't remain serious for too long, as a light-hearted element lightens the mood. Let me show you the scene and you'll know what I mean. So Kay is discovered, as Yuri predicted, but Kay also predicted that the doors to the cannon wouldn't open either. So what is the cooperative element that these characters alluded to?
あんた年の割に古いのね。
なのくせに口の減らないやつだ。
ユキ、きっちり下にいるよね。あんたが頼りだからね。
無駄なことを。
ユリ。
落ちるぜ。
あれ、ユリいないじゃない。どこよ。
マルカス、地獄へお行き。
And there you have it. But before we move on, I want to point out something. In my last episode, I spoke of how Kay, although is hard on the outside, is soft on the inside. Yuri, however, is the opposite. Yes, she is a lawful and moral individual, but when the situation becomes too dire, she goes for the kill. I know that some people would get the impression that these two have killed a few people along the way, but it was only ever in self-defense. Most of the time, they usually rely on knocking out opponents, and even though many of these soldiers, if not all of them, will perish in the volcanic eruption, it is still not in their nature to kill in cold blood. And this is true throughout the series. They never pull the trigger on someone when they had the upper hand. And yes, Marcus may have been reaching out for his gun, but if Kay was in that situation, she probably wouldn't have been as swift as Yuri. I truly do believe that these two need each other because they balance out each other, and one without the other wouldn't have succeeded in defeating Marcus and reaching Ghoulie in time. So reinforcements have come, but the duo are quick at taking them down, whilst the mortally wounded Marcus witnesses his plans crumble around him. Kay and Yuri warn Ghoulie of the self-destruct mechanism, but Marcus, overhearing them, activates a lockdown right before he dies, thus trapping him in the observatory. Wait, is that a Nintendo Famicom controller? Okay, good grief, the references. Okay, yeah, so obviously the girls won't give up so easily, and they attempt to find a way out. There is one thing I think is important here that this episode is emphasizing. I don't know if you guys noticed, but the cliche gender roles are in reverse. Instead of having your typical guy or guys rescuing a female, this is about two females that rescue a guy. Now that isn't the amazing part. What is amazing is the way that it was done. Kay and Yuri are just as effective at their job as a male counterpart would be without sacrificing their feminine qualities. This scene in particular illustrates this element effectively. Ghoulie's too weak to stand up? Well, Kay just picks him up, no problem. Oh, so the escape pod is full of highly important backup documents? Well, throw them out. It doesn't matter, we have to save the chief. I just don't know what it is about the scene, but I find joy in seeing this amount of effort put into saving him.
大丈夫主任
これまさか重量オーバー
いいわ私降りる何やってんのよバカ
うっさらねあと2分
Right here, at this moment, when I saw the slightly teary-eyed Kay, I realized something. This is the last episode of Dirty Pair. I was actually starting to feel what Kay was probably feeling. Yuri really didn't need to step out of the escape pod. Just one of them might have been enough, and I got the impression that this is what bothered Kay, that Yuri will probably suffer the same fate as her. For the first time ever, I was afraid for their lives. But Kay thinks up a crazy idea, to use the cannon to blast their way out of the facility. Basically, at that point-blank range, it's guaranteed to end badly. But they literally have no other options. They manage to blast away a hole, and just a few seconds later, the volcano erupts. For the first time ever, Ghoulie is helpless in assisting the Dirty Pair, and all he can do is be grateful. But, as crazy as it sounds, Kay survives the blast. But sadly, there is no Yuri in sight. Up to this point, we have seen glimpses into Kay's sensitive nature, but now, as she stands all alone, we see for the first time Kay breaking out in tears. I was really sad that Yuri may actually be dead, but also I was really sad for Kay, as I watched her crying for her friend to come back and apologizing for eating her cake. I'll admit it, I shed a tear in the scene. But remember that metal thing that she's standing on? Yeah, apparently Yuri was under it the whole time, being squashed by Kay's weight. You see what I mean by how the drama is usually stopped by some goofy element? So, amazingly, everything's fine. Ghoulie is safe. Kay and Yuri are safe. And that is pretty much it. All of their efforts, abilities, and trust in each other paid off. And as they run into the field, this concludes not only the episode, but the entire series. Although episode 8 had probably the best story, this one, however, was more fun. Most action-oriented anime try to do something big and massive for their finale episodes. Everything needs to be epic and amazing. The stakes always need to be high, but for the final episode of Dirty Pair, there was no epic conclusion. However, although it really wasn't very climatic, it really did reach an emotional climax. This show's emphasis is on the characters and nothing else. Not just in this episode, but throughout the series in general, I find them to be likable, interesting, and charming. For me, that is far more important than having an epic fight between heroes and villains. Not to say I hate that sort of thing, far from it, but in this case, I really like what they did in this episode. You can really tell that the writer's priorities wasn't on spectacle, but instead on story and characters.